In this video, I want to continue to establish the derivatives of the remaining four trigonometric functions: tangent of x, cotangent of x, secant of x, and cosecant of x. We'll begin with tangent. And we'll rewrite tangent as sine of x over cosine of x, another important trigonometric identity to remember. By rewriting tangent as sine of x over cosine of x, we can now use the quotient rule since we know how to find the derivatives of both the numerator and denominator. So we will find low d high, derivative of sine is cosine, minus high d low, the derivative of cosine is negative sine, and that's all over the denominator cosine square, cosine of x quantity squared. When we simplify the numerator, we get cosine square of x plus sine square of x over cosine square of x. And another one of our important trigonometric identities, this is called the Pythagorean identity, from which we derive two other special identities also. It's sine square of x plus cosine square of x equals 1. So applying this to our result, we get 1 over cosine square of x, and 1 over cosine of x is secant, another important. And since secant of x is 1 over cosine of x, 1 over cosine of x times 1 over cosine of x is just secant squared. And that is the derivative of tangent of x, and that is absolutely something that you will need to memorize. Next, let's find the derivative of cotangent of x. Well, cotangent of x is still this time cosine over sine. And once again, we'll use the quotient rule. Low d high minus high d low over low squared. And you can see that this time we're going to get almost the same thing as before, but we'll have negative sine square of x minus cosine square of x, and I'll factor out a negative 1. And once again, sine square of x plus cosine square of x is just 1. And we're left with negative 1 over sine square of x, which is just negative cosecant of x. So just as the derivative of sine is cosine, and the derivative of cosine is negative sine, well, the derivative of tangent is secant squared, and the derivative of cotangent is negative cosecant squared. Forgot the square for a second. So what would you need to remember from here? First, you have to remember that cotangent of x is cosine of x over sine of x, and then cosecant of x is the reciprocal of sine of x. Okay, let's go on to the derivative of secant of x. And as we stated earlier, secant of x is 1 over cosine of x. So once again, we can rewrite and use the quotient rule. So we have low d high, but here the derivative of 1 is just 0, minus high, which is 1, d low, which is negative sine of x, over the denominator squared, cosine square of x. When we simplify, we're left with sine of x over cosine square of x. But we can also break this down a little bit. We can break it down into a sine of x over cosine of x, which is a tangent, times 1 over cosine of x, which is a secant. And we're left with, when I write it, I'll write it as secant of x tangent of x, because it helps me to remember the derivative of secant is secant tangent. Secant of x times tangent of x. And maybe you can guess then what the derivative of cosecant will be. If the derivative of sine is cosine, the derivative of cosine is negative sine. Derivative of tangent is secant squared. Derivative of cotangent is negative cosecant squared. Well, if the derivative of secant is secant tangent, we're going to find the derivative of cosecant to be negative cosecant x cotangent x. We begin by rewriting cosecant as 1 over sine x and using the quotient rule. Low d high minus high d low over low squared. Simplifying, we just have negative cosine of x over sine square of x. And just as above, we'll break that down into two fractions multiplied together. So we have negative cosine x over sine x, which is cotangent of x, and then times 1 over sine of x, which is cosecant of x. And rewriting, I get negative cosecant x cotangent of x. Helps me to remember the derivative of cosecant is negative cosecant cotangent. And that gives us the 6 derivatives of trigonometric functions that you will absolutely need to memorize.